In this lecture, we're going to be looking at crew resource management. We're going to start by identifying exactly what crew resource management is and the problems that arise. It traditionally was founded in the aviation community, but we're going to see how it applies to EMS and the problems we see within EMS. And then any solutions that we can come up with on how to avoid the possible pitfalls when crew resource management isn't appropriately utilized. So what is crew resource management? It's also referred to as cockpit resource management. Again, it was founded initially in the aviation community. And it's a set of training procedures for use in environments where human error can lead to devastating effects, like for our patients. By us not working together as a team and all going for the same goal, that could result in serious injury, further health complications, and even death for our patients. Crew resource management is primarily used for improving, again, aviation safety, but that doesn't mean we can't apply it in our own field. And it's going to focus on interpersonal communication, leadership, and decision-making whenever we're in the ambulance and working on scenes as crews. Crew resource management can be broken down into DAM class: decision-making, assertiveness, mission planning. We often refer to this as pre-plans for the call, communication, leadership, attitude, and then the situational awareness. First, how did crew resource management even come to be? There are a handful of sentinel cases that led to the aviation community trying to develop a way that they could limit human error, but one of the ones that is the most glaring of a breakdown in communications is United Airlines Flight 173. So this happened in the 70s over Portland, Oregon. On approach, they were going to land, and only a couple of the landing gear lights illuminated, leading the pilot to believe that there was something wrong with the landing gear that could cause them to have an issue when trying to land the plane and that it wouldn't be safe to do. He reached out to the communications tower. He was also consulting with his co-pilot. He became so fixated on the lights that weren't illuminating and the potential issues that could have arisen from those that he did not pay attention to the fuel gauge, nor did he pay attention to his co-pilot signaling him that they were getting dangerously low on fuel. They continued to circle and circle and circle until eventually they landed a couple miles away from the airport in a suburban neighborhood. It was a crash landing. There were 189 total people on board the aircraft. 2 crew members and 8 passengers perished when the plane crashed in that suburban neighborhood. When it was being investigated, the ruling was that it was a failure of the captain to monitor properly the aircraft's fuel state and to properly respond to the low fuel state. His inattention resulted from preoccupation with the landing gear malfunction, which turned out to not even be an issue. It was just the light bulb that was burnt out. The landing gear would have operated completely fine. Now, could he have known that until they tried to land? Maybe not. But what he did know is if they ran out of fuel in the air, there was only one option for that plane, which was a crash landing. Unfortunately, his preoccupation or fixation on the potential issue led him to ignore the known issue. So as EMS providers, do we ever overlook major health conditions or major concerns on our scene whenever we get distracted by the possibilities or that distracting injury? We see the thing that is glaringly obvious and pulls our attention, and we ignore what's actually going to kill our patients in this moment. They have an open femur fracture that looks gnarly, but we don't notice that they're not ventilating themselves appropriately. We get so preoccupied on the what ifs of the call that we ignore the knowns. So ways to work through crew resource management. First of all, awareness. We should be using situational awareness constantly whenever we're working in the field. I call it the head on a swivel. You need to always be monitoring the environment that you're in, and not just for your safety, but for changes in your patient. The worst thing we can do as EMS providers, regardless of your certification level, is do an assessment on your patient and then never reassess your patient. To assume that the state that you initially found them and assessed them to be in is how they're going to be throughout the rest of your contact with them. The same can be said with scene. Just because a scene was initially safe whenever you arrived, it doesn't mean that it's going to continue to be safe while you're there. So you need to be alert to those changing conditions of both your scene and your patient. You need to recognize your limitations. You're but one person. You cannot possibly be expected or efficiently monitor and keep everything that's going on in that scene under control. That's why we work in pairs most of the time. The worst thing you can do, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, is ignore what your crew member or the person that you're working with is telling you. As a leader, you should be listening to everybody on scene. Just like that pilot wasn't listening to his co-pilot who was telling him, "We're getting dangerously low on fuel." He kept fixating on the landing gear lights and ignored the fuel depletion. And then we need to understand our equipment limitations. EMS can only take but so much with them. So to think that we can fix everything with the equipment that we have might be a fool's errand. We might need to enlist other resources, and to not call those resources quickly could be to our or the patient's detriment. So this is from the Flight Safety International, but honestly, I think it applies nicely into EMS. The clues that your level of awareness isn't maybe where it should be, and that you are asking for issues to arise. 1, failure to meet your targets. You're not appropriately training. You don't practice how you should be playing, whether it's in the classroom or once you get certified and you're in service trainings. You need to constantly strive to get new information, to make sure that you are practicing current medicine. Using undocumented procedures or leaving those standard operating procedures that you've been told. Those are there for a reason. For your safety and for the patient's safety, and to make sure that nothing is missed. It's the normalization of deviance in the field that one person tells or shows you that you don't really need to do it. Like, here's a shortcut or another way we can do these things. And then that one little shortcut turns into bigger shortcuts. And eventually you're so far from the original procedures you were supposed to be utilizing that you're not even really sure what it is you're going for. You come in to work this morning and your partner says, "I don't feel like checking off the truck." And you're like, "You know what? I'm just going to go do a quick glance." And so you quickly glance at the equipment, but you maybe don't count everything. And you're like, "Yep, it looks like it's all there." And then that leads to you actually don't even go in the truck before you go on your first call, to you're not signing for your narcotics as the paramedic. It didn't start out as, "I'm not going to look at anything on my truck and I'm not even going to sign for the controlled substances that I'm responsible for." It started out as, "I'm just going to quickly peruse. I'm going to make sure I have a first in bag, but I'm not going to look in the first in bag," till eventually it's bigger and bigger and bigger issues. And the only person that's going to suffer when you don't have the equipment or the resources that are needed on that call is going to be the patient, unfortunately. Remember that no one is flying the airplane alone, at least. That we're a crew, and you can't ignore things like the bad feeling, your spidey senses. If you're getting that feeling in your gut, whether it's for scene safety or looking at your patient, that something is just wrong, you need to pay attention to it. Just because the patient might be sitting there looking perfectly okay at the moment, if something in your gut is telling you that there's something wrong with this patient, pay attention to it. Ways to make sure you're maintaining good awareness. First of all, experience. And not just experience, but training with that experience. Just because you've been in the field for a long time doesn't necessarily mean you're good at being in the field anymore. If you have failed to keep up the training to stay current in our field, then it doesn't matter the amount of experience you have. Those two have to go hand in hand. Spatial orientation. So always being aware of your surroundings, but also your limitations. Knowing what you can and cannot do for your patient or for that scene is going to be incredibly important to make sure that operations run smoothly whenever you're on scene. And much like training in the mental, it's training in the physical as well. So keeping up those physical skills. If it's been a really long time since you've done a certain procedure, go to your training officer. Ask them if you can practice it. If you're still in the classroom and you don't feel fully comfortable in a skill that you have gone over in class and you've practiced in the lab and maybe have done or haven't done in the clinical setting yet, but you don't still feel at least competent in it, talk to your instructors. Ask them to go through those skills with you again. See if maybe after class or on lunch break, you can pull out those mannequins and just keep practicing whatever skill it may be until you feel a little bit more competent in it. Good communications. This honestly is where we tend to have most of our breakdowns. You need to first make sure that whatever you're doing is transmitted, so it's getting to who you need that message to get to, but also that it's received. This is like a good call and response. So think about our radio operations. Whenever you get on the radio and you are calling for dispatch, you don't just say dispatch and then start rattling off. You need to make sure dispatch, medic, whatever medic unit I am. So I'm getting your attention and then telling you who I am. I wait for them to respond to me. Once they've responded to me, so I know that my messages are being received, I can then continue on. If it's something like talking to the hospital and asking for orders for something to do for your patient, it's important to repeat back those orders to make sure that whatever you received was in fact what was transmitted, to confirm those things. Think about your other modes of communication when we're on scene. So only about 7% of communication is verbal, are the words that we're saying. The rest of it is going to be split between body language and vocal tone. You and I could be saying the exact same phrase, and if one of us has a very hostile stance, so we've got our arms crossed in front of us, we're tightening our jaw whenever we're done speaking, or we're saying it in a very harsh manner, it is two completely different messages that are being given. Think about whenever you get to your patient and you ask them what's going on today. I can say, hey, why'd you call us today? And if I'm saying it in a nice way and I've got a relaxed body position, then it's coming across as I just want to know why you called me, as opposed to why did you call us today? And I've got my arms crossed and I'm saying it in a much more aggressive, accusatory manner. That patient isn't going to want to engage with me because I am already belittling them and me being here. The same for whenever you're talking with other responders and your partner on scene. You will truly get a lot more flies with honey. Being kinder costs you absolutely nothing, but it'll end up with a better result in the end. In crew resource management, we really want to do a good job to foster a climate where questions can be asked of the authority by those who are not in that leadership position, and that you as the leader are encouraging those questions to happen. It's that just culture, that just environment that I want to make sure that everybody on scene has a voice, and that if somebody sees something that is going to be an issue for safety or for the patient, that they feel comfortable bringing it up. Again, I can't possibly see or be cognizant of everything on scene the entire time. So if someone says, hey, they don't look like they're breathing so well, do we want to maybe do this? Do we want to assess this? I need to listen to that. I don't need to immediately shut them down. Next is going to be our attitudes. For those of you who have already listened to the stress and the mental resiliency lectures, we've already talked about attitudes and burnout a little bit. So let's look at some of the attitude problems that are seen both in aviation and some of them that are seen in EMS as well. It's this, I'm the pilot or I'm the paramedic, so therefore I'm in charge. This ambulance is mine. That is where you sit. You don't open your mouth. EMTs are to be seen and not heard. It's that paragod, somebody who is very macho. But the problem is when you're very macho and you're shutting down everybody else on scene, you end up to being more impulsive and you open up yourself to a lot of issues. One, because nobody's going to want to work with you. And that breakdown in communication, that breakdown in the team working together is again going to affect patient care. The saying that EMTs save paramedics could not be more true. Not all paramedics, but unfortunately too many paramedics forget what it was like to be an EMT and forget the basics. And so when something starts to break, we've already done our initial assessment, we've ruled out any issues, we're getting to that ALS level assessment and treatment, and something starts to go downhill for our patient. It tends to be the EMT that notices it and points it out. That we need to go back and we need to reassess, and we need to treat those basic life threats before moving on and mixing in any of the ALS stuff. So for the people in EMT class, do not be afraid to speak up. You are just as important as everybody else that's on scene. And for those of you who are currently in AEMT or paramedic class, do not forget where you came from. EMTs are just as important as you on that scene. Everybody should get the voice whenever we're doing patient care. And it tends to be rooted in an attitude issue. So let's look at some attitudes versus some antidotes. Some anti-authority attitude is don't tell me what to do. Again, we're all a team working together. And if you're the crew member, it's not that you're supposed to blindly follow, but you do have to listen to the crew chief that is with you to an extent. If they're telling you to do something that's going to be unsafe for you or for the patient, please bring up the safety issue. But if they're the crew chief, they probably have more experience. So let them guide you in what's happening on scene. We don't want to do anything too quickly. And we don't want to not do something for our patient just because we feel like it's not going to benefit us personally, or we're not going to see the benefit of it on scene. If it's going to benefit the patient long term, we should be doing it. Some antidotes. So we've learned it anecdotally. We do need to follow the rules. Again, do not just not check off your truck because you don't feel like it today. It's the rule to do it. And there's a reason why. It's to make sure that you have all of the needed equipment, whether it's regulatory because you don't want to get in trouble with DHEC and you don't want to be fined, or because the reason DHEC and your services told you needed that equipment is so that you can make sure you appropriately take care of your patient. You also don't want to act so fast that you're not thinking about it before you do. Move with haste, but not recklessly. On to some decision making. Have you ever felt this way? Like you have so many things that you need to do and so much information that's coming in that you're not sure what's important, what isn't important, what to do first, what to act on, what can wait till later, what needs to be addressed at all. We can run into this a lot in pre-hospital medicine. You have the patient, you have the scene. Sometimes you have multiple patients, and sometimes you can have a scene that's very exaggerated or drawn out. You then add the bystanders that are there, other responders that are on scene, considerations from you and your partner. It can be a lot of information coming in. So we need to triage our decision-making process in what we're going to do in the information that's coming in. And the way we can do this is just to decide first. Detect the need to make a decision. If it's not something you need to worry about and not something that you need to address, then ignore it. Don't worry about it. Come back to it later. Deal with what's immediate in front of you. That distracting injury. So I do note that my patient appears to have an angulated ankle. It's pointing the wrong way. I need to address that at some point, but if my patient isn't effectively breathing or has hemorrhage somewhere else, I need to address that first. I've detected the decision that needed to be made. Then look at your options. For this, it says consider the goals of your flight. You need to consider the goals of your patient care. What do you need to do to appropriately manage the scene and treat the patient? I need to start controlling the bleeding, so I need to hold pressure. I need to apply a tourniquet. Their airway is insufficient, so I need to reposition. I need to start assisting ventilations. So evaluate your options and then pick which one is going to work best. So whenever we're looking at opening the airway, if they are having a problem breathing, there's a couple different ways that I can do it. I can do a jaw thrust. I can do a head tilt chin lift. I can insert an OPA. I can insert an NPA. All of these could lead me to the same goal of getting my airway maintained with a basic adjunct and then allowing myself to assist ventilations. But just because it's a way I could get there doesn't mean it's the right way for this patient. So if it's a trauma patient, I wouldn't want to do a head tilt chin lift. I'd want to do a jaw thrust. If they still have a gag reflex, I wouldn't want to put in an OPA. I'd want to put in an NPA. So choosing what option is best for the patient and then implementing that choice. Putting in the NPA, doing the jaw thrust procedure. I then want to monitor my patient to detect if the changes that I implemented are getting my desired effect. And then I want to evaluate to see. I want to look at my pulse ox. Am I having an increase in my pulse ox? Does my skin look better perfused? So when you have a decision to make, just decide. Decide to do it. For decision making, again, you have to have good situational awareness. Not every patient is going to have one fix. Do not be a cookbook EMT or a cookbook AEMT or paramedic. The reason that a lot of places moved from calling their guidelines or how you are to treat patients from protocols to guidelines is it's guidance. You need to pick what is going to best serve your patient. Those are supposed to be very generic to be tailored into who you're actually treating and what you're seeing, because no two patients are going to be alike. So therefore, no two treatment plans are going to be the like. You get to make the wrong decision once for you and for the patient, but you can make the right decision forever. You can keep making the right decision, keep advocating, keep doing what's right by you and your patient forever. But that wrong decision, just one time. Only once do you get to do that. Things that can affect our decision making, fatigue is kind of a big one for us, right? You're tired, you're working long shifts, it's the 2 a.m. call and you're on the back end of a 48. Physical fatigue and mental fatigue very much can weigh and can cloud our judgment. The stress, that's not just stresses from work and the stress of the call, that's also stress from home that you're bringing with you. And if you've listened to that stress lecture, there are different types of stress and there's also different ways that stress can manifest. All of that could be included in this. You being impaired, different medications you may be taking if you came into work still drunk or hungover, all of that is going to affect your ability to appropriately make decisions for you, your partner, and your patient. So please do not do that. Keep their best interest in mind if you can't keep your best interest in mind. And then for personality, some people are just abrasive. Some people also don't want to make decisions. That's only going to, again, hurt one person, your patient. And the last thing I want to talk about is assertiveness. There's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive. You can very much be assertive and make sure that you get your opinion out there and that you are advocating for your patient and for your safety without being aggressive about it. You don't lose yourself and you don't go into that blind rage. As a crew member, you're going to have the right to assure that your life will not be compromised by any action or inaction due to miscommunication or misunderstanding. Being assertive is what allows you to do that, both for pilots and in the cockpit, as well as for us in EMS. It's not overriding authority, but is ensuring that you have your voice heard, since you are just as liable and have just as much risk as everybody else on scene. So find your voice. Ensure that you stand by your convictions, and that if something seems wrong, say something. See something, say something. That should be everybody's safety principle. Thank you for joining me on this crew resource management lecture. If you have any questions, please let your instructor know.